Life in Medina, the foundation of the Islamic State. The Prophet's life in Medina marked the dawn of a new era, divided into three major phases, each marked by distinct challenges and milestones. The first phase, 1AH, 6AH, a period of turmoil and threats, both internal and external. The Muslims faced constant opposition from hostile tribes, hypocrites, and the looming threat of war. This phase concluded with the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah in Dhul Qaeda 6AH. The second phase, 6AH, 8AH, with a truce established between the Muslims and the Quraysh, the Prophet took Islam beyond Arabia, inviting kings and rulers to embrace the message of monotheism. This period culminated in the conquest of Mecca in Ramadan 8AH. The third phase, 8AH, 11AH, Islam spread rapidly across Arabia. Delegations and tribes arrived in Medina in large numbers to embrace Islam and pledge allegiance to the Prophet. This golden phase ended with the passing of the Prophet in Rabi al-Awwal 11AH. The initial challenges in Medina. The Hijra, migration, to Medina wasn't merely an escape from persecution, it was the beginning of a constructive mission, the formation of a unified, just society under divine guidance. Every able Muslim saw this as their duty, to help build, secure, and uphold the framework of this emerging state. Upon arrival, the Prophet faced the complex task of managing three distinct groups within Medina. 1. The believers, Muhajirin and Ansar. These were the Prophet's loyal companions, a spiritually elevated group. However, the transition to Medina was difficult. Unlike in Mecca, where they were oppressed yet focused, in Medina, they now faced the challenge of laying the foundation of a new socio-political order. They were spiritually strong, but materially and socially under-resourced. The Quranic revelations from the Meccan period had focused on individual conduct, morality, and core faith. Now, they would guide community formation, justice, and law. 2. The Madinese polytheists. These were local tribes yet to embrace Islam. Though not openly hostile like the Quraysh, they remained neutral or skeptical. The Prophet needed to win their trust through diplomacy, dialogue, and by demonstrating the ethical and practical superiority of Islamic governance. 3. The Jewish tribes. The Jews of Medina had lived there for centuries and were well established. They initially signed agreements and treaties with the Prophet, including the Constitution of Medina, but as Islam gained strength, tensions rose. Their political maneuvering and occasional betrayals would require wise and principled handling. This early Madinese period was one of testing, transformation, and preparation. A time when the Prophet not only preached but modeled a new way of life, setting the stage for Islam's rise as a comprehensive, just, and global message. Building the new Muslim society in Medina. In Medina, the Muslims found themselves in a completely new environment, one of freedom, security, and self-determination. For the first time, they were no longer persecuted or marginalized. Instead, they had full autonomy over the social, economic, political, and religious life of their community. The Prophet and his companions were now free to lay the foundation of a unique society, unlike any the world had ever seen. This society was not a mere reaction to pre-Islamic norms, it was a revolution of divine ethics, a civilization grounded in revelation and justice. But the task ahead was enormous. The building of a society on divine principles required more than enthusiasm, it demanded gradual legislation, spiritual refinement, education, and social reform. He it is who has sent among the unlettered a messenger from among themselves, reciting to them his verses, purifying them, and teaching them the book and wisdom. Quran 62:2. The Quran was revealed gradually, cultivating minds and hearts. The Prophet implemented it, trained his followers, and shaped a generation of believers who would become models of sincerity, knowledge, and sacrifice. The early Muslims rushed joyfully to embrace Allah's guidance. Their faith grew stronger with every verse. When his verses are recited to them, they increase in faith. Quran 8:2. The Muslim community in Medina was primarily made up of two groups. The Ansar, the helpers. These were the residents of Medina, people of land, homes, and comfort but still divided by historic rivalries, especially between the AWS and Khazraj tribes. Islam united their hearts, but the traces of pre-Islamic discord required gradual healing and guidance. The Muhajirin, the emigrants, these were the Makkan Muslims who had left everything behind, homes, wealth, and families. They arrived in Medina as jobless and homeless, and their numbers continued to grow. The city, already modest in economic capacity, began to strain under the weight of this new influx, worsened by the economic boycott from anti-Islamic forces that cut off key imports and resources. Other groups the Prophet had to engage. Alongside the believing community there were other segments. 1. Madinese polytheists. These locals were not openly hostile. Some were curious or dissatisfied with their ancestral beliefs and eventually accepted Islam sincerely. Others, however, nursed hidden hatred and acted hypocritically, pretending loyalty while plotting in the shadows. At the forefront of the hypocrites was Abdullah bin Ubay, a prominent figure of the Khazraj tribe. Before Islam's rise, he was poised to become the leader of a united Medina. The Prophet's arrival crushed his political ambitions. Outwardly, he claimed Islam, but inwardly, he harbored deep resentment and sought every opportunity to weaken the Muslim cause, often manipulating new or weak believer to achieve his ends. The Jews of Medina, hidden hostility behind a familiar face. The Jewish tribes of Medina had originally migrated to the region from Syria, fleeing the persecution of Byzantine and Assyrian empires. In Hijaz, they adopted the local Arab language, dress, and customs, and even intermarried with the local population, but they kept their ethnic pride intact. They considered it no sin to deceive or exploit the Arabs, believing themselves religiously justified in doing so, a mindset the Quran exposes. Because they say, "There is no blame upon us concerning the unlettered." Quran 3 hours 75 minutes. Their religious devotion had faded. Instead of being true torchbearers of divine guidance, they practiced fortune-telling, sorcery, and dark spiritual arts, claiming secret knowledge while exploiting people's fears and weaknesses. Masters of trade and division. The Jews had monopolized key trades in Medina, especially in food, wine, textiles, and finance. Their grip on the economy was tight, and their practice of usury was ruthless. Arab chiefs, often lured by status and luxury, would borrow money lavishly. But perhaps their most dangerous trait was their ability to corrupt and divide. The Jews had long mastered the art of sowing discord between Arab tribes, igniting ancient feuds, keeping tensions alive, and profiting off both sides. Whenever the flames of war dimmed, they rekindled them not only for control, but to profit from war loans and instability. The three major Jewish tribes. Banu Qaynuqa, allies of the Khazraj. Banu Nadir, allies of the AWS. Banu Qurayza, also tied to AWS, settled near the outskirts of Medina. Although they had hoped for a prophet to arise among the children of Israel, the arrival of Muhammad, an Arab messenger, shattered their expectations. Not only did his lineage offend their pride, but his message threatened to dismantle their exploitative hold over Medina. Islam's focus on unity, justice, and prohibition of usury was a direct threat to their influence. The Prophet came not only to unite the warring Arab tribes, but also to restore social and economic justice, which meant that the lands and wealth the Jews had gained through manipulation might be reclaimed. Silent hatred and the pain of recognition. From the very beginning, the Jews recognized the truth of the Prophet's mission, but refused to accept it. Their hatred simmered quietly beneath forced smiles. A powerful moment from Safiya bint Huyay, later one of the Prophet's wives, captures their inner conflict. She recalls, "I was the most beloved child of my father, Huyay bin Akhtab, and my uncle Abu Yasir. But when the Prophet arrived in Kuba, they went to see him. When they returned, they were shattered, silent, their faces dark with grief. I ran to greet them, but they wouldn't even look at me. I overheard my uncle ask my father, 'Is it really him?' 'Yes, it is, by Allah.' He replied, 'Did you recognize him?' 'Yes, and my heart burns with hatred for him. Ibn Hisham 1/518-519. The Prophet's first encounter with the Jews. Truth denied. Among the most striking moments that unfolded on the very first day of the Prophet's arrival in Medina was the encounter with Abdullah bin Salam, a distinguished rabbi and one of the most respected Jewish scholars in the city. Drawn by curiosity and sincerity, he came quietly to examine this man whom the people now called a messenger. After posing a set of probing questions, he was convinced beyond doubt the answers were those of a true prophet. He embraced Islam on the spot. But he warned the Prophet, "If my people learn that I have become Muslim, they will slander me and lie about me." To illustrate this, the Prophet summoned a group of Jewish leaders and asked them what they thought of Abdullah bin Salam. They praised him highly as a learned scholar, a man of virtue, and a pillar of their community. Then the Prophet revealed, "What would you say if he embraced Islam?" The men were stunned and immediately turned against him, declaring, "He is the worst among us. A liar, a fool, and the most evil of men." In another version, Abdullah stood before his people and said, "O Jews! Fear Allah. By Allah, you know that he is truly the messenger of Allah." But they replied coldly, "You lie." That incident exposed the deep-rooted arrogance and denial of many Jewish leaders. Even when truth stared them in the face, their pride refused to submit. This was the Prophet's first taste of the duplicity and resistance that would later emerge more fully in Medina. Medina within, Mecca without, enemies on all fronts. While the Prophet was striving to establish unity and justice in Medina, a greater threat still loomed from the south, the Quraysh of Mecca, the relentless archenemies of Islam. For a decade, Quraysh had subjected the Muslims to humiliation, starvation, torture, social boycott, and psychological warfare. They had stolen their homes, wealth, and land, and tormented their families. Their influence over the rest of Arabia due to their guardianship of the Kaaba allowed them to launch a campaign of propaganda and pressure, calling for a complete economic and social boycott of Medina. As Muhammad al-Ghazali writes, "A state of war virtually existed between the Meccan tyrants and the Muslims in their new abode. It is foolish to blame the Muslims for the consequences that naturally followed from such a deep-rooted conflict." Fiqh as-Seerat, page 162. The Muslims were now fully justified both legally and morally to retaliate. The loss of their homes, families, and lives demanded justice. It was time to respond to tyranny and defend their faith and future. Leadership rooted in revelation and justice. In the midst of these complex social, political, and spiritual challenges, Prophet Muhammad stood as both messenger and leader, navigating each crisis with divine guidance, unwavering patience, and precision wisdom. He offered mercy where hearts opened but did not shy.